This conference will now be recorded.
Today we are going to cover option valuation in today's session. We have with us Apeksha Kukreja from PwC, who will deep dive into Black-Scholes method and Monte Carlo simulation for option valuation and the complexities that are involved therein. Apeksha is a director in PwC's valuation team Mumbai and has been with the firm for almost 14 years. She is a commerce graduate from Calcutta University and a chartered accountant since 2005. She has also passed examinations conducted by Chartered Financial Analysts USA and Global Association of Risk Professionals USA. Apeksha specializes in the areas of business and equity valuations, valuation of intangible assets, financial instruments, financial modeling and reviews, and bid advisory. With this, I'll request Apeksha to take over the session.
Thank you, Bhakti. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor to be invited. The topic which I'm going to cover today comprises of option valuations.
पूछते तो सही तभी बाद में खा लेते हैं ऐसा मुझे लगा मैं तो खाया सब मंगवाया जिसे तुम खाओ
Rashmi, you have to mute yourself.
I think we all experience this during our work life and in meetings also. Right. The topic which I'm going to cover today is option valuations. I will just share my screen and set out the presentation, but the flow of it would largely be where I would discuss the overview of options and then deep dive into the Black-Scholes method and Monte Carlo simulation. I have prepared 3 case studies, 1 for Black-Scholes and 2 for Monte Carlo simulation, and I hope you will find it interesting. With this, I begin the session, please. The session will be divided into overview and basic principles of options, Black-Scholes method, Monte Carlo simulations, a brief touch-up on binomial tree method, and question answers. So, what are options? We are all familiar with options, which are essentially derivatives which derive their value from an underlying investment. This underlying investment could be equity, foreign exchange, commodity. So an option gives its owner the right to buy or sell, but not an obligation to buy and sell an underlying asset at a certain price and over a specified period of time. There are 2 types of options. One is a call option and the other one is a put option. A call option gives the buyer the right to buy an underlying asset at a predetermined price, which is the strike price, at a specified time. The seller is under an obligation to sell the stock or the commodity or the underlying, depending upon the type of the contract. On the other hand, a put option gives the buyer the right to the buyer has the right to sell an underlying asset at a predetermined price and at a predetermined time. The seller is under an obligation to buy the stock if assigned. There are 2 types of options, American and European. Essentially, they are the same except the difference over which these can be exercised. In an American option, the option holder can exercise the option at any time from the purchase till the expiration date. But in case of an European option, the option holder can exercise the option only at the time of the expiration. American options are more complex to value as compared to European options because there is an optionality to exercise the option at any point in time over the life of the contract. A long position and short position, buyer of a call option has the right to buy the underlying, whereas in a short position, the seller of a call option is obligated to sell, and the long put, buyer of a put option has the right to sell the underlying, but in case of a short put, seller of a put option is obligated to buy the underlying asset. Some of the key factors which are important in valuing stock options or any options for that fact. Some of these are the current share price, the exercise price, also known as the strike price, the time to expiration, which is essentially the life of the contract, the volatility of the stock price. This could also be the volatility in the foreign exchange and or the commodity if that is the underlying of the contract. The risk-free rate. The risk-free rate is always commensurate with the currency in which the strike price and the current share price are denominated. So if the stock is traded on the New York Stock Exchange and it is denominated in dollars, the risk-free rate that we would use would be of the US markets. Similarly, if the stock is traded in India and is denominated in INR, we would use the risk-free rate as applicable in India. And then the last element is the dividend expected during the life of the option. These are some of the key parameters on how they have an impact on the option value. It is essentially a recap of what we have seen earlier. Factors affecting the value of the stock option: current share price, strike price, expiration date, stock price volatility, risk-free rate, and the dividends, and how the movement in each one of these affects the option value. This is something which we all are quite familiar with. So I will move on to the next slide and see where do we typically encounter option valuations. Now, the most common instance of valuing options is when employees are given ESOPs of a company. These could be ESOPs or these could be restricted stock units in which the employee of a company is given the right to acquire the shares at a grant price pursuant to the employee stock option scheme of the employer. The second instance, quite commonly seen in business combination, where there is a put or a call option in acquisitions. Buy a call option to acquire additional shares from seller or promoter, or the acquirer may write a put to acquire additional shares from the seller promoter. Pardon me, there is a typo here. This should read as buy. And the last instance which we typically see are the embedded derivative in convertible instruments. If an issuer has issued convertible instruments and the conversion rate is not fixed or the conversion ratio is not fixed, that may result in an embedded derivative, which may be required to be valued for financial reporting purposes. Now, in most of these cases, the reason we may end up valuing these options is because financial reporting under various Ind AS standards requires the options to be fair valued at each reporting date. In case of ESOPs, the valuation would be at the time of grant. But if these are cash settled ESOPs, then these may be required to be valued at each valuation, each reporting date. Put and call option, again in case of put and call, these also need to be revalued at each reporting date. An embedded derivative in the convertible instrument typically is required at the time of initial recognition. But there may be disclosure requirements with respect to most of these items, and that is why there's a requirement to value them. With this, I move on to the financial theory behind option pricing models. I will take a pause and ask if there are any questions. Please feel free to interrupt me and ask if there is anything you would want me to repeat or have a question about. So the most commonly adopted valuation methods for option pricing are Black-Scholes, Monte Carlo simulations, and lattice models like the binomial. There is a common theory behind option pricing models, and there are two concepts, which is that a portfolio can be built that exactly replicates the payoff of an option at over the time spectrum that extends from the initial date through the expected term, and that the fair value of risky financial instruments can be modeled in a risk-neutral framework. Now, these are the common threads which bind all the three or four methods which are generally adopted to value options. And each of these techniques use many assumptions to estimate the option's life. But these assumptions are largely common, which are exercise price, expected term, price of the underlying stock, the stock's volatility, risk-free rate, and the dividend yield over the expected term. It is important to note that the risk-free rate volatility should ideally be commensurate with the expected term of the option. We move on to the first method, which is Black-Scholes method to value options. I will not spend too much time on this because this is a fairly commonly adopted valuation method for valuing employee stock options, and also in some cases the put and call options, which may be underlying the put and call written in business combination arrangements. The BSM assumes a log normal property of stock prices, which means that percentage change in stock price in a short period of time are normally distributed. And there are variables which are inputs to the BSM, which are again the current value of the share price, the strike price or the exercise price, risk-free rate, volatility, life of the option, and expected dividend on the underlying asset. The value computed under BSM can be interpreted to be the present value of expected payoff of the option at expiration. While most of the ESOPs which are granted in the Indian market by employers are fairly simple, where if there is a listed entity, the ESOP or the restricted stock unit which may be granted may be exercisable at a certain price, which to a large extent may be determined by the current market value, and over a period of time it will be a simple time vested option which may not have any performance related parameters or any targets with respect to total shareholder returns. And these elements and it's a fairly simple instrument to value. The first case study which I have deals with the BSM. Is my screen visible? Can you see my Excel file?
Yes, it's
Okay, so this is a fairly straightforward example which I have selected. There is a company ABC which has given a stock option to its employee. The valuation date or the grant date is 30th June. The maturity is 31st December. The maturity date would be as per the terms of the ESOP or the terms of the or if this is not an ESOP but an option which is traded on the stock exchange, the deal value would the deal term sheet would mention the maturity date. It would also mention parameters like the exercise price, which is 75 rupees in this case. And the current stock price is 60 rupees. The risk-free rate is 0.5. These are all dollar denominated numbers, and that is why I have used a risk-free rate of 0.5, which is commensurate with the life of the option. In this case, the life is only 6 months, like the way you can see. This is the time to maturity, which is nothing but the period between 30th June to 31st December. The annualized volatility of the stock is 35%. 35% is the historical volatility of the stock commensurate with the life of the option. Typically, one can manually compute the volatility by taking the stock prices from the closing stock prices from the stock exchange. Alternatively, there are softwares which are available or platforms which are available which can do this computation. Some of these may be Bloomberg and Reuters. If one has access to these platforms, the volatility numbers are fairly easy to derive. Then there is the dividend yield. In this case, the stock which I have selected has not so far declared any dividends. But one would typically look at arriving at the dividend yield by analyzing the historical dividend declaration pattern of the company. At what percentage has the dividend been declared? One can take an average over the historical period, which is similar to the life of the option. But if there are any aberrations, like say for example in a couple of years only maybe say 2% has been declared, whereas in 1 year you may see 20%. These aberrations may be ignored and a more representative average may be considered. And then the formula for BSM, which which allows us to arrive at the value of the option at $1.71. This is an example of a listed company, but it can so happen that an unlisted entity may also grant stocks to its stock options to its employees. In that case, the first step would be to arrive at the fair value of the stock price, which is of course not available in the public domain because it's an unlisted entity. Over here, one would have to carry out a proper business valuation, adopting either income approach or multiples or a relative valuation as the circumstances would be suitable for that particular company, arrive at a per share value, and then carry out this Black-Scholes model to arrive at the value of the option. Any questions over here?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hello? Yeah. So, in the case of the unlisted company, how to compute this annualized volatility and all that?
Sorry, I'm not able to hear you too well, but what I understood is that in case of a private company, how would we determine the volatility? Is that the question?
Yes.
Okay. So in case of an unlisted company, one can look at a peer set which may have been identified for carrying out the business valuation. The peer set which you would use to arrive at the WACC or to arrive at the multiples, you can calculate the volatility of the same peer set to see, considering the historical prices commensurate over the life of the option, and you can take a average or a median based upon the volatility prevailing in that sector based on the comparable companies. That is one approach. The other one could be that you can look at the sector index. Say if your private company is an IT player, you can look at BSE's IT index to adopt the volatility from there. These are the two commonly adopted approaches one uses to arrive at a volatility or to use the volatility parameter in case of an unlisted entity, when you're carrying out such exercise for an unlisted entity.
And the stock price also we have to compute as per the fair value method only, the current stock price.
Current stock price, you mean the 60 over here?
Yes.
If this pertains to an unlisted entity? Yes, you would undertake a proper business valuation. You would actually carry out an equity valuation where you would determine the per share value of your unlisted entity.
Okay, got it.
Okay. Any more questions, or can I move forward?
Some questions in the chat box directly.
Pardon me, I'm not very familiar with this software. So...
Hi, Apeksha, Rashmi here. I was asking this. Hi. This model that you are presenting, is this proprietary to your firm or is it available on net? Because we just wanted to understand if there is any source where we can directly download it from.
No, Rashmi, this is actually we've built this model. The formulae that are available in the public domain for BSM, those formulae have only been transferred into Excel.
Okay.
And there are also, quite so. While we have built it, to be honest, as a professional, to cross check the numbers which we have computed, there are also certain publicly available calculators where you can do a quick cross check to see whether a simple BSM is running appropriately or not. But once you've established the credibility of the model which you have built, then you don't have to do that cross check every time. But these are all the formulae which are available in the public domain. So we've just plotted this into Excel.
Okay, got it. And even if the company is listed, is it sufficient to take volatility for one company, or we can take a peer set for a listed entity and include that as well in the volatility computation?
See, the first step would be to determine whether the stock for which you're doing the option valuation, whether it is frequently traded or not. If it is
Okay.
frequently traded, then you can consider the volatility of the stock itself, because
Mhm.
that's essentially what will derive how the stock behaves in the future, right? But if for some reason you determine that there is not enough depth in the market for that stock, then you can follow the same approach that you would do for a private company, where you
Oh.
can take comparable companies. And
Okay. Got
also, in case of BSM, there is a guidance available on the SEBI website. It is SEBI's employee stock option guidelines. I think it is a 2019 publication, which gives a very detailed note in terms of how ESOPs should be valued, how each element should be considered. So it will tell you that in case of the stock price, it should be the valuation or the grant date -1. So if the
Okay.
grants were issued on 30th June, then you should ideally consider the closing price for 29th of June, like that. So there's a
Okay.
detailed guidance available in that. Also, our Ind AS 102, that also gives the appendices to the Ind AS, that gives very detailed, how do I say, detailed inputs in terms of what are the best practices to adopt.
Okay. And in case of unlisted entities also, we can apply the guidance prescribed by SEBI, right? SEBI regulations.
In that case, you may, as a general principle, yes, but you may find it of limited relevance, because over there, the stock price is something which you necessarily have to compute. Volatility is something which you will actually have to work out the pure set and then compute.
Okay. Okay. At times there are very companies there which are, niche business and you may not find comps. So will it be fair to take a sector index or, from say BSE or NSE and compute volatility of the whole sector? Does that work generally, or we need to have a comp set?
I think it's better to have a comp set, because for VAC computation or for multiples, even for transactions, you would have typically looked at if not a perfect, but somewhat correlated or somewhat similar pure set, right? So instead of index would be, if you're not getting anything, that should be the last resort, I would think. But to have a pure set is most recommended.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I move on to the next topic. This is the case study which we just discussed. This is the storyline of the case study. So I'll move forward. Monte Carlo simulations. Okay, I am not a mathematician, so the discussion of the underpinnings of the Monte Carlo simulation is outside the scope of the session. I will speak about what is typically adopted, what are the best practices which I have experienced and adopted in the last few years since I have been carrying out these sort of valuations, and what are the general thesis that one follows when working with Monte Carlo simulations. So the model Monte Carlo simulation essentially assumes that the underlying entity stock price follows a geometric Brownian motion. It is an accepted methodology for simulating expected future path of stock prices. Typically, 10,000 simulations, anywhere between 10,000 to 1 lakh simulations are run. Excel has a limitation. Excel cannot go up beyond, I think it's 1 lakh. Excel doesn't go beyond 1 lakh, but in terms of from a practical standpoint, we typically run 10,000 to 20,000 simulations and not more, because the files tend to become very heavy and may not work properly. In a Monte Carlo simulation, what we typically do is that a large number of sample paths are simulated and a fair value of the option is derived for each sample path, and the payout is computed. The average of these 10,000 or 20,000 simulations which are being computed is considered, and it is discounted to the valuation date. The fair value of the option is estimated as the average value of the fair values calculated for each sample path. Like the BSM, it is important to develop the assumptions for the initial stock price, volatility, dividend yield, and any other important factor which may which may be defined in the options terms. We will discuss this later part in a bit more detail. Options can be priced by Monte Carlo simulation. First, the price of the underlying asset is simulated by random numbers generated, and then the value of the option is found by calculating average of the discounted rates up for all the parts, and then a present value is applied. Present value factor is applied to arrive at the present value. In this case, the discounting rate is the risk-free rate because the assumption is that the model has been replicated in a risk-neutral environment. This is different from our business valuations where we typically discount cash flows considering WACC or a cost of equity. Over here, we will risk adjust the underlying parameters and then arrive at a parameter which is essentially risk free or risk adjusted, and like by like we would use the risk free rate as the discount rate. Now I have listed certain formulae here which are important. These are the terms which are typically used in Monte Carlo simulations, and you would see this in the Excel when we run it. To generate random numbers in Excel, this is the formula which is adopted. The drift is used for simulations. Drift is essentially a constant directional movement in which you would expect the stock price or the underlying to move. And this drift is how do I say is adjusted for a shock by multiplying it with a random number, such that it can assume a value from zero. I mean, on both sides of the zero, it can assume any value. How do we apply this? I think that is something which all of us struggle with initially when we do this for the first few times. I will run through a case study where this is the storyline. The valuation date is 1st January 2021. It is a stock option which has been granted to an employee. But this is not a time vested stock option. This is the vesting of this option is linked to the total shareholder returns. Total shareholder returns are essentially defined as the returns or the appreciation in the stock price plus the dividend that the individual will be able to make over the life of the option. So over here, the end price of the of the ESOP is 31st December 25. It's a 5-year option, and there is a graded vesting pattern, which essentially means that if the total shareholder returns are less than negative 25%, there is no vesting. If the total shareholder returns are equal to minus 25%, there is 50% vesting. If it ranges between 0 to negative 25%, there is a straight line vesting between 50 to 100%. If the TSR is between 0 to positive 24%, the vesting is 100 to 175%, and if it is greater than 25%, the vesting is 180%, capped at 180. What does this essentially mean? Say, for example, if the TSR when we compute works out to 12%, I would get 100% plus the straight line vesting between 0 to 12%. So in this particular vesting pattern, an employee can get for each 100 shares which may have been ESOPs which may have been granted to him, he may make between 0 to 180%, which means 0 shares to 180 shares. This example is based on stock option plans for very senior employees of some of the listed companies in India. While this does look complicated, one would come across such stock options in the Indian context also. It is not very often, but you would see something like this every once in a while. So Indian companies also follow such complicated employee stock option plans. Now with this storyline, I will go on to the model.
Apeksha, I just have one question.
Sure.
So in the example you have mentioned, so basically if someone has been granted 100 options, 100 shares, okay, then if the company's return is more than 24%, then he would get additional 180%. That's the way it works.
No, so he will get additional 80. he'll get 100 of what was originally given to him and an additional 80.
Then in 0%?
So if say in your example you said that if the returns are positive 24%, but if the returns are say negative 26%, then he will get 0
Correct.
shares. So it's a game between 0 to 180.
Not even the 100 also.
Not even. So there can be instances where the employee may not even get 100 shares because the company has not performed, or the share price of the company has not performed as was expected. See, these stock options are not given to all employees. Mostly in my experience, I have seen that such share price linked options are given to fairly senior employees who are able to to a large extent play a directional role in the way the company performs. So this may be to the top management, or say to the top 2 tier of employees, that way. So this is nothing but the storyline which I have plotted here. I will go to the simulation straight away. The stock price over here, the valuation date or the grant date is 1st January 2021. So the stock price for this entity, which I have considered as valuation date -1, which is 31st December 2020. The maturity date is 31st December 25. This is as per the terms of the ESOP. The risk-free rate is the zero coupon government security yield for a government security of 5-year tenure. This is picked up from the FIMDA website or from the NSDL, sorry, not NSDL, NSE debt segment, where this information will be available. The dividend yield percentage is 2% because that's the historical dividend yield, the average historical yield of the stock, which we computed over the last 5 years. So over 2015 to 2020, what was the dividend yield? The average of that has been considered here. The reason of 5 years is because the expected life of the option is also 5 years. In case of, pardon me, there is a typo here. In case of the volatility has been computed at 42%, which is nothing but the historical volatility commensurate with the life of the stock, of the option. This again has been computed considering the historical stock prices. There may be periods over which one may experience very high volatility. So say if the stock option has only a life of 1 year, but 2020 was a very volatile year, then can we look at a volatility which is different than the life of the option? Because 2020 being an extremely volatile year, the stock prices would have been moving, there may not be a fixed trend and the volatility may appear very high. In these kind of situations, it is advisable to take a slightly longer term view and not strictly restrict yourself to a 1 year or a 1.5 year, because in the year where we know that there was volatility, that may not be representative of the next 1 year. So a slightly longish view may also be taken, and this is something which we have seen both when we are doing the valuation and when we have access to other valuers reports, when we are reviewing such valuations, that a more practical stand has been taken to rule out extremely high volatilities because the past year may have been very volatile. Any questions on any of the parameters?
Just one question, Apeksha.
Mm-hmm.
When we say that it has to be a longer period, means what has been the practical approach? Means whether 2 years period one should take in case of instead of a 1 year, or one should look at a 3 year. How does one decide that?
So Bhakti, 3 to 5 years I have seen. See,
Okay.
usually TSR linked stock options may not have a life of 1 year. It on an average it will be at least 3 years, because 1 year is too short a time frame to really determine how well or otherwise has the stock performed.
So
But
it's not from this example perspective, just generally that if there was an option which had only one life of 1 year, or maybe say life life of only 6 months, and considering the volatility which we see, what do we do in such cases?
Okay, so if the stock is, if there is no specific aberration in the volatility for that particular year, then you would use the volatility commensurate with 6 months or 1 year. But say 2020 was a very volatile year. So in that
Yes.
case, I would look for volatility over the past 3 years or maybe 5 years. Both would be evaluated, 3 years and 5 years, and then a called decision can be taken. I have also
Okay.
seen an average of 3 to 5 years being considered. I mean, given that 2020 was extremely volatile and even earlier part of 21 was very volatile, I have seen some sort of averaging being considered, to rule out the extremely high volatility which prevailed in the last year.
Okay.
Right. I come to the time to maturity, which is 5 years in this case. And then you would recall from the presentation that, sorry, I'll just go back to the presentation. You would recall from the presentation, there were two terms. One was the drift. Drift is nothing but the average daily return minus the variance divided by 2. And shock is the volatility of the stock into the square root of time into the random number. These two parameters are something which I will discuss now. Over here, the drift is the risk-free rate. So the average daily return, it is nothing but the risk-free rate minus the dividend yield. This is the return expectation minus the variance. Variance is the volatility raised to the power 2 divided by 2 multiplied by the time factor. The shock is volatility multiplied by the square root of time. And to the random number, we will just return. We will come to the random number over here. I mean, these are essentially formulae which are also available in the public domain, but I have just set it out over here to for easy understanding. Before we go into the actual simulation, just one more parameter which I would like to discuss is the strike price. The reason the strike price is important is because in this particular example, the employee would have to pay 5 rupees to exercise the option, and that will play a role in the payoff. So if say the simulated price is 80 rupees, the payoff is 75. And 75 is what we are going to use to present value and arrive at the value of the option. I have generated random numbers over here. This was the formula, sorry. This was the formula which I set out for the second bullet is what I set out for the generation of the random number. This is the formula which you typically follow in the Excel to generate random numbers.
Yeah, Apeksha, I didn't get that 5 rupees strike price or a point. Can you just repeat that?
Can I come to it once I have run through the simulation? In that case, it will be easier to understand.
Sure.
So this is the same formula which is here. I have pasted that formula, and so this is the formula. I will redo it in front of you. I have pasted it here, which gives me the random numbers, and I have replicated this 10,000 times. This has generated the random number. Now to simulate the stock price, my starting point is the current stock price of the company. This stock price has been, we consider the exponential of the drift plus the shock into the random number. So there is a directional, constant directional movement which has been adjusted for a shock factor considering the random number. This particular adjustment has been done 10,000 times. You would see that every time I refresh my screen, the numbers are changing, because that's every time you redo the simulation, the numbers would change. Now when the numbers have been frozen, when you are fairly comfortable with the outcome which you are getting, the typical practice is to value paste these random numbers so that you arrive at a fixed number which will go into the report. In the report, so every time you refresh, the numbers would change. But from a reporting perspective, it's important that we give a single point value number because this is going for the financial reporting purpose. And a range, while a range is usually seen in business valuations, given that this is for financial reporting, a single point value is generally given in the reports. So while till the time I want to play with this and my numbers have not been frozen, I will work. There will be a a simulation which I will keep on running. But once I'm fairly comfortable with the outcome, I will value paste the random numbers generated so that my model is frozen. Once I have simulated the stock price, I come to the total shareholder return. Now, what am I simulating for? I have essentially simulated today's price, which is 75 rupees, for a 5-year period, considering certain random numbers. So the drift is the constant movement over the 5-year period, and the shock is also the factor which is considering the 5-year period. So at the end of the simulation, I am arriving at simulated stock prices for a 5-year period, and this will keep differing over the period that you want to run your simulations for. So totally the price that you arrive at is the price at the end of the period for which you've run the simulations. Now I come to the total shareholder return. So if you see my formula, it is the closing price. When I say closing price, essentially this is the price which I'm expecting after a 5-year period. This price minus this price minus the initial price of 75 rupees plus the dividend which I'm expecting over a 5-year period is the total return which I'm getting from this stock. And in percentage terms, if I divide it by the opening price or the price as of today, it gives me the percentage return from this stock. That is nothing but the total shareholder return. If I were to just do it live with you right now, this is the closing price. From here, I minus the opening price and I add the return expectation which I may have over the dividend expectation which I may have over the 5-year period. See, it has changed. It was 38 and it has now become 192. Let me just freeze these numbers so that it's easier to explain. So 121 is what I have gotten from this stock over the 5-year period. This 121, when I compute over 75, it has given me a return which is 60%. So in this case, going by my grading option, the grading parameters, if the total shareholder return is in excess of 25%, I get 180. I will, for every 100 options that I hold, I will get 180 shares. And you will see that this is what is happening here. Here, I have applied a formula in such a way that it allows me to restrict the or cap the number of ESOPs to 180. I will get into the formula shortly, but the same exercise which I adopted here, I have simulated this again through the 10,000 simulations. So for each path which is being simulated, I'm computing the total shareholder return. So it is not that I will take an average of the 10,000 simulated prices and then apply the vesting parameter. Rather, it's the other way around. For each of these 10,000 simulations, I'm going to determine what is the vesting percentage. And based on the simulated total shareholder return, I will arrive at a vesting percentage given the formula that is there. Any questions so far?
From where are you getting these column B numbers?
Column B numbers, these are the random numbers which we generated. So if you see the this is the formula in Excel to generate random numbers. If I paste this formula here, I will get certain random numbers, and I have replicated this formula 10,000 times to arrive at each of these random numbers.
of this number, random number, and if we increase say from 10,000 to 50,000, do our the PV factor will remain in the range? Say it is now varying from 95 to 108 to 88. So if we increase the probability or random number frequency, so will we get a very conservative number?
It will. So the higher the volatility, you will see that the vesting changes because the TSR falls.
Okay, and what is the range of this random number? Like
it can go on either side of 0. It ranges from 0 to infinity because these are all random numbers, no?
Okay. Okay. But
I'm again
then in this,
sorry, I'm
yeah,
just freezing
then
the random numbers again.
Okay.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah. So in this case, so again, so last call is a value or judgment, like where he has to stop on the random numbers frequency. Like if we keep running this random number every time, suppose if I want to replicate this model, I will be getting some different number, and some other valuer will be getting some different number. Not like a binomial. If we run the formula, he will, like, both of us will be getting the same number.
No, so that's the beauty of Monte Carlo simulation. You are also right, and so am I. But
Yeah.
yes, the number of every time you refresh, your random number will change, and it is not possible that you and I will arrive at the same random numbers if we are running the simulation. Now,
because we, yeah, sorry, you go ahead.
As far as the count is concerned, whether it should be 10,000, 15,000, 20,000, I think Excel can handle up to 50,000 or 70,000 if I'm not wrong. Beyond 1 lakh, you need a software. But what we have seen is that the more simulations you run, the heavier the file becomes, and it becomes very difficult to work with such a heavy file. So between 10,000 to 20,000 is what I have seen in my experience. Typically, best practices across Big Four, I have seen around 10,000. And 10,000 is a fairly good number, which will give you I would say, a pretty good, estimate. It will be fairly accurate in that sense.
So one question, Apeksha. When we say that when we are generating these random numbers and it keeps on changing the final value, whatever maybe this random numbers generation between you and me or someone else doing it, generally, is there a range of the value within which it moves around, or it can be like anything beyond 5%, 10% or something, or it's generally range bound?
Generally range bound, Bhakti, as long as the parameters are the same, no? As long as these parameters, if you are preparing this model and if I have prepared this model, if the parameters are the same, you will see it will be mota range bound. It will not be like I'm getting 80 and you will get 90. I may get an 80 and you may get an 82 or an 83, but it will not be a 90 or a 95.
Okay.
Because random numbers is one aspect. The value is more sensitive to all these parameters. I mean, volatility being, see, if from 42 I just increase it to 50, this will go down to 70. And if I simulate the number again, just 1 second, I'll just simulate it again. See, every time I do a refresh, you are around 73, 74.
Okay.
You are not, whereas now if I change this 50 back to 42, which was the original number, this is 83. Now every time I refresh, you will be around 83, 86, 85, like that.
Okay.
So the parameters are more important rather than the random number. Now, I think there are some more questions in the chat box, but I'm not able to see that. So if anyone has any more questions, please ask.
So you have addressed whatever there.
Okay.
So I have one more question.
Sure.
Apart from this model, a practical, say a private equity investor, when investing in a business, So his trigger point or a valuation optional point is not trigger when suppose there will be X amount of valuation. There will be certain parameters. So the entire valuation will be used by this Monte Carlo, or we can use the say Black-Scholes. Like say
So
the
when
trigger
you
point is
say,
the future valuation of that stock of that valuation, like series 2, series B, C, D, E value based on those valuation parameters.
so okay, so if the parameters are linked to, say for example, future series, in that case, I have seen typically another method being adopted, which is the back solve, which may require a separate session on its own. But if the private equity's trigger point is achievement of a certain amount of EBITDA or achievement of a certain revenue estimate or a GMV value, then Monte Carlo simulation will be used. So it depends upon what parameter are we talking about. The next case study which we will see has EBITDA as one of the parameters, a certain EBITDA to be achieved before the option is exercised. If that is the case, if it's any like revenue or EBITDA or any sort of GMV or any other financial parameter, then I have seen simulations being used. But if it is, like a series based valuation, like next series happens, then so and so, beyond that, another step. Over there, I have seen backsolve being adopted. But backsolves is a totally different topic to cover.
Correct. I agree, because see, the point I was coming from, we had a client where the option was trigger point was a minimum IRR rate. So we got a valuation report from the two different big fours as it was a requirement. One has used a Black-Scholes and another has used a Monte Carlo. The option value was very different. So there was a confusion between the auditor to take which option, because it was again damper on the financials if you take either of the valuation and the option methodology. So that's was the point. So I just wanted to understand from those perspective.
No, so like I said, it's a gray area, and unfortunately, in the Indian market, you do not see these kind of complicated valuations very often. I mean, even at our practice, even at PwC, I may not do more than say 4 or 5 engagements where we are running Monte Carlo simulations in a full year. So these sort of projects are very far and few in between, but they are very interesting. So it keeps the brain ticking that way. But but and the thought process of one valuer can be very different from another, because there are no set practices or no best practices which you will find documented the way certain say for example, if you're just dealing with an impairment assessment, there is a full-fledged standard on that which talks about how to go about the impairment assessment. But given the rarity of these arrangements, there are no fixed valuation standards or any other standards which determine how one goes about valuing them. So the thought process of one valuer can be very different from the other.
Understood. Yeah. Thank you so much.
So Apeksha, so what kind of the transactions for which this kind of the method would be perfectly suited?
The Monte Carlo simulations, we have seen where the equity needs to be simulated, and where there are either EBITDA or revenue or any other financial parameter which needs to be simulated. So typically, we've seen Monte Carlo simulations for those. Binomial also gets adopted, but binomial not too often have I seen. I mean, it's one of the more preferred methods, but I have not seen binomial getting adopted too often. So simulation, wherever equity is the underlying, most of the times I have seen equity or any sort of returns linked to equity, I have seen Monte Carlo being adopted. Mostly you will find it in put and call options for in a business combination, or in a ESOP where the ESOP's vesting is linked to a market return or ranking of a particular stock amongst peers, or ranking of the stock between say an index. So over there also I've seen Monte Carlo simulations being adopted, but the underlying will be somewhere equity linked.
Thank you.
So if I come to this formula which talks about the grading. In this first instance, you see that the returns are less than negative 25%, and over here the person will get zero stock because it is negative. If you see the formula talks about J17. J17 is nothing but the shareholder return. It says that if the return is less than minus 25%, then you take zero. Zero is the shares which are vested. If it is between minus 20, if it's equal to negative 25, then 50%. If it is greater than minus 50 but less than 10%, then you do a graded vesting where 50% minimum you get, plus between 0 to 25 proportionate, linear proportionate, whatever is applicable. If it exceeds 0% but is less than 24%, again there is a graded vesting where you say 100% to milega, plus there is a linear interpolation between 0 to 24 and 100 and 175 is the upper limit here. So between 100 and 175, how much you will get linearly, and the last is 180. So the way the formula has been built, it allows the vesting to be computed in a certain manner, and this has been done for each of the 10,000 cases. So you would see the max over here is 180 because it's capped at 180. It cannot exceed 180. And then I come to the payoff. So I believe somebody had a question on what is the payoff. So in this case, if the simulated price is 25 rupees, somebody would have to pay, the employee would have to pay 5 rupees to acquire that stock. So the payoff is 20 rupees. Similarly over here, if the simulated price is 108, the expectation of this price after 5 years is 108, but that individual will have to pay 5 rupees. So his payoff or the net profit is 103 in this case. The higher the strike price, the lower the payoff. Again, I have computed the payoff over the 10,000 cases and the expected vesting. So payoff 20%, but 0% vesting. Expected payoff 20 rupees, but 0% vesting. Whereas in this case, the expected payoff is 162 rupees, but it's 150% vesting. So from the company's standpoint, the expense which the company would have to bear towards this employee is 160 multiplied by 180%, which is 292. Now this has been again worked out for all the 10,000 cases, and we arrive at an average over here. This 127 is the expected average payoff from this ESOP over the life of 5 years. But this 127, the payoff of 127 is available after 5 years. So we present value this for a 5-year period using the RF as the discount rate. You would recall in the PPT I had mentioned that given that this is a risk, the premise of these models is risk adjusted framework, the discount rate will be the risk-free rate in this case. So the present value of 127 for a 5-year period at 6% will give me 94. 94 is the ESOP cost to be borne by the company in its financial statements, multiplying it by the number of ESOPs which have been granted. Open to questions. Okay, this was a fairly simple example which I gave. This can be more complicated. Like I said earlier also, the employee stock option plan can have an instance where the stock which has been given to the employees may be linked to the shareholder return of not just itself, but say of 5 peer companies. In that case, there may be a vested like a vesting schedule which talks about how the TSR of our company compares to that of the peers, and if it's got a, say, like a very high percentile, say 99 percentile, then how much will vest? If the percentile is the ranking of that TSR amongst the peers is 95, then how much may vest? So these plans can get more complicated, and again, I have seen some of these plans in the Indian context where the performance of the stock may be compared both to an index and to a given peer set, where each of these two categories may have a weighting and weightage, each having a different graded vesting pattern, and based on the average of these two may again have a third graded vesting pattern. So there are quite a few complicated ESOP plans which are there, which are being used by some of the listed companies, and in this case it is important to see how the peer companies are correlated to each other. So I'm not going into those complicated cases, but I'm just highlighting that you may come across a situation where the company which you are valuing may have a peer set against which its total shareholder return may be compared, and then there may be a graded vesting pattern. So over there, looking at the correlation between the stock is important. I think I saw a question in the chat box.
There's a question in the space. How do you apply this to equity peer ranking? Simulate the movement of the peer prices as well. How do you simulate the index if ranked against the index?
Okay, so in that case, simulation is simulation. Just the way I have run the simulation for this stock, so say if my peer set comprises of 3 companies, in addition to the company which I'm for which I'm doing this exercise. So I will run 4 simultaneous simulations, and for each path, each of these 10,000 paths, I'm going to do a comparison. So say if I'm just putting random numbers over here, say this is the first path. So this is company A, this is company B. Sorry, bear with me, my Excel has frozen. Say this is the simulated price of in the first path, and this is the so this is my peer company 1, this is my peer company 2, and this is my peer company 3, and say this is 45. I'm going to compute the shareholder return for each one of these, just like I have done it here for my own company. And say for example, the TSR works out to say 10%, 25%. Sorry, my Excel is hanging. And say this is 2%. Say this is 2%. Then what is the rank which my own company 59 has amongst these 3 companies? So there will be a rank function. You can determine the rank of this amongst these. In this case, it will be the last because it's 4th, because this is negative 17%, whereas all the others are higher than this. So once the rank is determined, you would do this for each of the 10,000 paths, such that you arrive at a rank at an average rank for your own stock, and then you will apply the graded pattern. So in a sense, you're running 4 simulations together. Are you with me?
Yeah, he's understood.
And in
he's
case of the index,
he's asking about the index.
I saw that. In case of the index also, it is the same thing. You would be running the simulation of the index the same way you would simulate the stock. But over there, the complications arise as to how will you take the dividend yield. So over there, certain some sort of industry averaging may be required to determine the dividend yield. A lot of times on platforms like Bloomberg and Reuters, you may get the dividend yield of the stocks which may be available, but you just have to be a little careful as to how will you get this particular parameter, the dividend yield, in case of a index. But when you simulate the index, it is no different than simulating the stock, you will work out the volatility of the index itself over the last 5 years in this case, and apply it in the same way that you would do it for a stock.
Apeksha, one question.
Yep.
By any chance, from any database where we can get some valuation report on this options valuation of some listed companies and all that?
No, valuation reports may not be available in the public domain at all, because these would be there is no regulatory requirement to do these except as required under the Ind AS for financial reporting purposes.
Okay, under MC also it's not required.
Mhm.
Okay.
I would find it very difficult to get hands on an option valuation report in the public domain.
Okay, because
Until unless
normal
you have
valuation,
the access of it.
yeah, because normal valuation reports are available under MCA, but I have not come across any option valuation report. So I just thought to check with you.
See, the MCA report, the valuation reports which you may have come across on the MCA website would be with respect to the PAS form filings, where certain transaction may have taken place and there is a requirement to file the report pursuant to the transaction, or if there is any report to be submitted to the trustees for the NCD or the debenture holders. But on that same note, there is no requirement to file the option valuation anywhere for that fact, because it's purely for financial reporting purposes. So until
Right.
unless you have access to it as a professional or as an auditor, or through the means of being an advisor on a transaction or to a client, I don't think it will be available so easily in the public domain.
Okay. Yeah, thanks.
Apeksha,
Can I
hi.
move on to the?
In the storyline
Sorry,
that you
please.
gave,
Yeah.
so the vesting conditions that were laid out were actually primarily market linked, right? Now, what we've seen in a lot of cases is that there are, in some cases, where whether vesting happens or not depends on performance linked conditions, like, for example, the employee grading, rating, and those kind of things. And in some cases, like in this case, it's a market linked condition. So is it here that you ended up using, let's say, a Monte Carlo simply because we need to build in a market condition in the valuation? Because otherwise, if it's simply performance linked, we would just do it at a per share and end it there, right?
Right, absolutely. So these are all market linked conditions. Market linked being the performance of the stock on the stock exchange, and that is why the simulation was required.
Right. And even in case of these being market linked, ultimately in each of these conditions, how much actually vests is actually going into determining the final cost that they consider, and that has to be built in, right, as per the guidance.
Yes, yes. So if you see, I worked out the per ESOP
Right.
value here,
Right.
which will then
Right.
get multiplied by the number of. So if you see this is the
Right.
fair value per ESOP applicable, which will get applied to the base number of ESOPs granted.
Right. Right. So purely being market linked was the reason, let's say, we recommend using a Monte Carlo in such kind of complex conditions, right?
Yes. A BSM will not work because
Right.
there are
Right.
so many. See, I have chosen a very simple example for the simulation here. In reality, the kind of ESOP plans that I have seen, which are applicable for some of the listed Indian companies, there are, say, 15 pairs against which. So if say 100 ESOPs are granted, it will be divided into two parts. There will be a 50% weightage to the rank which the stock has versus a pure set of 15 companies, and it may have a rank based on the performance of an index. So you are
Right.
actually running 15 pairs plus the main entity plus the index. You're actually running 16, 17 simulations together. So first you determine, so in the first leg you determine what is the rank and what is the vesting pattern as per that. Then you determine what is the vesting, what is the performance as compared to the index and what is the vesting pattern there. You apply 50-50 weightage or a 60-40, 70-30, however it may be described in the plan. And then you arrive at an average. And then there may still be additional conditionalities, over there, to one step further. So
Right.
in reality, it is much more complicated. This is a fairly simple model which I selected.
Understood. Thanks.
Okay, I'll move on to the second example which I have. This is something which was which we encountered in case of a business combination. The storyline goes like this: that the acquisition was made on 31st March 2019. At the expiry of 3 years, the acquirer has a call option to acquire additional 20% stake from the erstwhile promoter. So in the original transaction, the acquirer had acquired a minority stake of 30%, but at the end of the third year, he had acquired 31%, and at the end of the third year, he had the option to acquire 20% more to increase his stake to 51%. But in this case, the exercise price was defined in the agreement, and the purchase price was defined as target EBITDA of FY22 multiplied by an EBITDA X of 9 minus the net debt as on 31st March 2022. Once you have this purchase price, the exercise price was 20% thereof, because 20% is the incremental stake which was proposed to be acquired to exercise the call option. This is the storyline. I will move to the model. This is the same storyline which you have seen in the PPT. There are two simulations you will see that I'm running here. Let me first take you through the equity simulation, because we have just seen that. Transaction date March 19, maturity date March 22. The 100% equity value of the entity. Now in this case, the target was a private entity. There was no price available in the public domain for this target, but the 100% value implied by the deal worked out to 1500 crores. The life of the option is 3 years, so 6% is the discount rate commensurate with 6 years, with a life of 3 years, which is the zero coupon government security yield. The dividend yield, I have taken 0% in this case because it's a private company with no dividend history. Volatility I have taken at 45%. I believe somebody had a question earlier as to how we determine the volatility for a private entity. This was such an example where we adopted the peer set in the similar industry as the target, the peers which were operating in the same industry as the target. We selected the volatility of those peers. We took a median of those peer companies. The same peer set was used to derive the WACC and the multiples. And the volatility was 45%, and the exercise EBITDA multiple is 9x. We will come to the EBITDA simulation a bit later, but the time to maturity being 3 years, the drift and the shock have been computed, and I have simulated 15,000 over a 3-year period. There are 10,000 simulations again which I have run over here. I have frozen this because, sorry, this is not frozen. Every time I would play with it, the numbers would change. So you would see again the numbers are range bound. It is somewhere between 1780 crores going up to 18,200 crores or so, which you may see, but the numbers are fairly range bound. So till here, the equity simulation, I hope you're with me. This is similar to what we did in the earlier example. Any questions so far? Okay. The next step is the EBITDA. Now, the target EBITDA for 2022 is 150 crores. This is the EBITDA which has been given, but it is not necessary that this EBITDA will be achieved. And I need to account for this call option on day 1, on the day of the transaction, for my initial reporting pack immediately after the acquisition. So in this case, how do I simulate the EBITDA? you will see that there are theories which where the volatility of the EBITDA can be linked to the volatility of the stock. Now, for the stock valuation, or rather the volatility ascribed to the stock of this company, we have taken 45% in the previous worksheet, which is based on the peer companies. But this is the volatility of the stock. It is not necessary that the EBITDA or the performance of the entity would perform in the same way as the stock is performing. To an extent, the absolute performance of the company is not dependent on the stock markets. It's the performance of the underlying business. So there are two things which we will do. We will start from the discount rate or the WACC of the entity and arrive at the WACC which can be attributed purely to the EBITDA to make it risk neutral. And we will adjust the volatility of the stock to arrive at the volatility which can be ascribed to the EBITDA. Let me take the volatility first. What I have done is I have taken 45%, which is the volatility of the stock, and I have divided it by the 1 plus debt equity ratio to get a deleveraged volatility ascribed to the business. The equity is there's financial leverage in these volatility of the stock. So to deleverage it, because it does not matter how you have leveraged your business, the EBIT at an EBITDA level, it is not impacted by the way you have capitalized your business, right? So to arrive at the EBITDA volatility, I have deleveraged the volatility of the company's stock. With me here, that what I said, does it make sense?
Yes, but can we consider the volatility as a historical number of, say, historical margins of EBITDA of a company, and do based on those parameters, like, say historically companies' average margin was 9 to 11%, and based on the volatility, and so it is quite a stable margin, right? So there's no much volatility, and based on those calculation, we can calculate the volatility of the EBITDA also, right?
So very good question. In fact, that is something which we have also learnt over a period of time by way of trial and error. While theoretically speaking, what you are saying does make sense, when in reality, when you get down to that, you will see that it may not give you an answer which makes sense in all situations. So in case of a startup, what would you do? The performance keeps changing every quarter. Or if I say, okay, let me not look at this company, let me look at the peers. If I look at the peers and try to see, okay, what is the EBITDA percentage common to all the large players in that sector? Again, you may get some sort of a sense as to how the profitability works or how volatile is it. But even for those companies which you are looking at, each year may not be comparable to the next. Say, for example, your main competitor is on a path of inorganic growth, and you have seen their absolute EBITDA amount increase from 100 to 200 simply because they have made an acquisition. So, the answer which you may get may not make sense under all situations.
Understood. Makes sense. Else we can consider the adjusted EBITDA or a comparable EBITDA. So that will be more complicated. I understand. Again, by considering the adjusted, like a soft diligence, we can consider and eliminate the unwanted cost or unwanted, parameters, and historical, based on the historical margin parameters, we can calculate it to understand the actual margins. Is that possible?
In a short span engagement of 2 weeks, if you have a sample set of 50 companies, 10 companies, pure set of 10 companies, it will not be practically possible for you to go back 6 years or 5 years and try and do the diligence of the financial statements of each of those entities. You will actually be reading 50 statements then, 50
Oh,
financial statements, which
understood.
will be
Yeah,
a very time consuming effort and may not, and you wouldn't even be sure of the outcome that you get.
understood.
Can you give me a minute? I will just switch on the light. I don't know how the background is behind me, but it's getting very dark to see the screen. So just bear with me. Give me a minute. I'll just switch on the light and be back. Thank you. So we were
Yeah.
at the deleveraging of the um, volatility. Um any questions here? Can I move to the how we derive the discount rate to
Just a small question, whether this will be the targeted debt equity or if this will be the current debt equity.
it's the target debt equity. So whether it is target or whether it is current depends upon what you have used in your cost of equity and WACC computation. Whatever number debt equity you have used in the WACC computation, keep this in line with that. So
Understood.
if we have gone with a market average or a market median or the entity's target itself, whatever we may use based on our judgment, we have to keep it the same as what we are going to use here.
Understood. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Now I come to how we derive the discount rate. Now, the discount rate is determined adopting something called the practitioner's method. Practitioner's method is a fairly common method which is used to arrive at the risk premium attributed to the EBITDA or to the profitability rather than to the stock itself. The starting point over here is the cost of equity. This is the cost of equity here. 15% is nothing but the CAPM driven cost of equity, which was arrived at to value the target entity, to value the company. The risk-free rate over here for a 10 years ZCYC was 6.5%. So the RMP in this case, the risk premium, the long-term RM was actually 8.43. Now the ZCYC for 3-year period was 6%. So the cost of equity for the short term period, see, we are moving from 10-year to 3 years because 3 years is the period which is commensurate with the life of the option. So I have considered the risk-free rate of 3 years. I have derived the RM and then arrived at a short-term cost of equity of 14.43%. But this 14.43% is actually the cost of equity attributable in the short term to a company which is leveraged. But I need to arrive at a discount rate which I will adopt to discount the EBITDA, which is not dependent upon how one capitalizes the business. So in that case, what do? I know that the RMP is 8.43. I know that 1 plus debt equity is 1.15. This 1.15 is the same debt equity which I have used to arrive at my volatility for the EBITDA. And this over here, you would see that the debt equity which I used in my cost of equity is 0.15. So 0.15 was used in deriving the cost of equity. It is the same debt equity which I'm using to deleverage both the volatility and the risk premium to arrive at a discount rate applicable only to the EBITDA for a 3-year period. So if I deleverage this, I come to an adjusted RMP of 7.3%, where I'm simply dividing the normal RMP attributable to the equity with 1 plus the debt equity to arrive at the RMP attributable to the EBITDA. To this, I have added the 6% ZCYC applicable for a 3-year period to arrive at the discount rate which is applicable to the EBITDA in this case. This is the discount rate which I'm going to use to present value my EBITDA and then use it for simulation. with me? Any questions? Would you want me to repeat this again? Okay. Now moving back to the EBITDA simulation, we have arrived at the discount rate. We also know the volatility, which has been adjusted for the debt equity. The midpoint. Now I'm using a midpoint to discount the EBITDA because EBITDA accrues evenly over the period. My risk-free rate is commensurate with the same risk-free rate which I have used for discounting for simulating equity. And using these parameters, I have arrived at the expected present value of EBITDA. 1500 has been discounted for a 2.5 year period, considering the discount rate of 13.33, which we arrived at using the practitioner's method. This 1074 million is now being used to simulate and see what is the average EBITDA which may arise over the 3-year period. So I have used the random numbers and I have simulated this for 10,000 paths. Now it is important to note, and a lot of times practitioners make this mistake, the random number which I am using for simulation is the same random number which I have used for simulating my equity. If this is not linked, you may end up with a situation where equity price may be increasing, but the EBITDA is actually projected to fall. So two paths which are going, if the random numbers are not linked to each other, and in 10,000 simulations it becomes very difficult to check, but if these are not linked, it may give you an illogical situation where the expected the random number multiplied with the equity value may give an equity value after 5 years which is higher, but in the same path the EBITDA may be falling because the random numbers are not linked. So it is very important and recommended best practices to keep these linked all the time. It could be possible that you have a next leg of EBITDA. Say this EBITDA is for the 3rd year. If there is another leg where you can exercise another 20%, a call option on a further 20%, and there is a target for the 4th year, it is recommended to link the simulation of the 4th year EBITDA to the price which you have simulated in the 3rd year, the equity price which you've simulated for the 4th year. But the 4th year equity should be linked to the, or rather the random number for the 4th year equity should be linked to the random number of the 3rd year, because it's all following a path. So these are some of the nuances to bear in mind. Once I have arrived at the random numbers, I'm going to go back to the equity simulation and try to arrive at the purchase price. Now I'm doing this so far at 100% level because and we will bring the 20% because our call option is to acquire 20%. We will do that at the end. It's easier to simulate at 100% level, easier to explain also. I have linked the simulated EBITDA for each of these 10,000 simulations. The projected net debt is 0 for this company. There is no projected net debt for 2022. From a practical standpoint, we typically do not simulate balance sheet items. It becomes very difficult to form any logical conclusion on balance sheet item simulations, particularly if you are running 10,000 or more than 10,000 simulations. It can, if you were to simulate the net debt number, it can give you very absurd results. So from that perspective, typically I have seen that whatever is the management's projection with respect to the net debt number or the gross debt number, that is kept as a constant. So say in this particular example, if we say that it will be say 100 crores, so that 100 crores I'm going to keep constant for all the 10,000 simulations and not simulate it at all. It is just an input. Based on this, I will work out the purchase price. If you recall from the storyline, the purchase price is target EBITDA of 2022 multiplied by a EVX or EV EBITDA X of 9 and minus the net debt. Using that same payoff, the same purchase price formula, I have multiplied the EBITDA with 9. 9 is coming from here, which is the multiple, and I have minused the net debt number. This has been done over the 10,000 simulations. Now the payoff. Payoff again for 100% equity level. The way to read the payoff is simulated equity value is 25,000 in this case. My purchase price or my strike price is only 15,000, which means the call option is in the money, so the payoff is 10,000. This again payoff has been carried out for each of the 10,000 simulations. This is the average from this average, but this payoff is available only after 3 years. So it has been present valued for a 3-year period adopting a certain discount rate. I will come to this discount rate in a minute. But this payoff is attributable to 100%, but the stake which we need to worry about is 20%. So this 100% payoff has been multiplied by a 20% to get the payoff for the call option that our client is eligible for. Now the discount rate which I have used to discount the out considering the risk-free rate of the ZCYC. Yeah, Bhakti.
Apeksha, we lost the last bit, I think so.
Hello.
Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me?
What did you hear last? Yeah, I can hear you. What did you hear last so that I can repeat?
Relevant stake, say 20%, I think so. Somewhere after that, your voice was a little breaking.
Okay, so what I was saying is that 588 crores is attributable to 100% stake, but our client is eligible only for a 20% on the call option. So I have multiplied it by 20% to get the value of the call option, which our client holds. So this is the value which will go into the financial statements of the acquirer. Now to discount the payoff, I have used a discount rate of 7%. 7% has been arrived at considering the ZCYC ZCYC coupon 3 years 6%. Again, this is the risk adjusted framework. So this 6% is commensurate with what we have used in the simulation also. But I have added a 1% for the credit risk of the acquirer. This credit risk, one should bear two things in mind. The credit rating of the acquirer is important. The credit rating may or may not be available in the public domain. One has to take a slightly more informed view in terms of what could be the rating or a synthetic rating for such an acquirer, and the term of the option over which the payment is expected. So this payment is expected after 3 years. So I have used 1%, which is commensurate with a AA rating for a 3-year period. It is the spread to be added over and above the risk-free rate. So this gives me 7%, and this is what I have used to discount the payoff for a 3-year period. The source for the credit spread could be the CRISIL bond matrix available on the FIMDA website. That is one of the most well accepted sources. The other could be the Bloomberg platform, which gives geography wise, rating wise, industry wise spreads over the risk free rate for those geographies. I think this brings me to an end of this case study. Any questions on this one? Okay, I will move on to the presentation. we discussed this case study. We move on to the binomial tree model, which is typically used to value American options, and there are large. You would build a tree of movement up and down at each node, ascribing probabilities to possible outcomes, and it may typically look like this, where at each point you determine what is happening and what is the probability of that, and it keeps panning out from there. But this is a method which needs deeper analysis, and a detailed session will be scheduled in the coming months as the group may decide. So I have kept it very brief for the binomial lattice model. Typically, I have seen Monte Carlo being adopted more often than the binomial lattice models. But again, this will be covered in a separate session. I'm open to questions, if any.
I have one question in the beta model that we discussed previously. If you can just open that Excel sheet.
Yeah.
So here the equity value, we have not discounted this equity value, but we have already discounted, EBITDA value while simulating it, right?
Correct.
Correct. Then again, after considering the payoff, say after checking whether the option is in the money or out of the money or at the money, then again we are discounting and we are calculating the net present value. So wouldn't be at the double calculation of the EBITDA at the multiple level?
On the contrary, okay. So let's go backwards. When we have present valued the payoff, that is fairly simple. Payoff is available only after 3 years.
Correct.
The payoff, so that needs to be present valued any which ways. This is straightforward. So this I don't think is an issue. When we present value the EBITDA, we are actually making it risk neutral. We are arriving at an expected present value of EBITDA, and then I'm simulating it to arrive at a value which will be after 3 years. And on the same footing, the equity value of 15,000 is something which will accrue after 3 years. So it's a like to like.
So we are calculating the EBITDA risk neutral and without the volatility. Like it's again not a contrary to the simple calculation where the acquirer has a right to acquire when it is a 1500. Say the target number is 1500, and the same multiple will be the XYZ. But now we are calculating the risk neutral EBITDA. Wouldn't it affect the SPA agreement? Like just wondering about this thing.
So see, you will true this up every time you arrive at closer to the exercise date. So it is not that this will be done only once. At the initial date, it is required. It is required every quarter. If you're a listed entity, this is required at least every once a year for 31st March. And you will see that this estimate, this target per se, while may remain fixed, the simulation of the equity, since it is you're valuing the company to an extent, the or say if the company has performed really well, it has achieved the target for year 2, that value is already getting captured in the value of the equity. So
correct.
Just by looking at the actuals of it, so say 1 year has lapsed, and we can see that in the first year itself, the EBITDA which has been achieved is 1,050 crores, for example. That 1,050, whereas the target was only 900. So you can clearly see that this is going to be out of money, because the equity value will be so much higher that somebody will be better off exercising I mean, from a call option perspective, this is in the money, but from a put option perspective, it's out of money. So if somebody exercises it, in this particular case, the acquirer, if they exercise it, it is heavily in the money and in their benefit. So
they will
that kind of live, Exactly. So that kind of live review does happen as you get closer to the exercise period.
Okay, so I was just wondering, so the discounting it's happening twice. Like we are calculating EBITDA at a risk neutral, and again we are calculating the payoff based on the actual equity value, right? So that was my confusion.
So the present value of the EBITDA has been simulated to arrive at a equity value after 3 years. The multiplication of 9 with the simulated EBITDA, you're actually simulating this 1074 to see where you would land after 3 years. So the simulation takes care of that. It's not a double discounting.
Okay, I'll just take some time to grab these things. So maybe if I have, just drop your mail.
Yeah. May I ask a question?
Sure, please go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify. The dividing by 1 plus debt equity ratio. It's logical. It adjusts towards what is required so far as your EBITDA volatility is concerned, and so far as the other adjustment is also concerned. It makes sense. You're adjusting towards it. Now, is this some kind of a standard? It's the best possible because nobody can actually properly adjust for it, and this is considered to be good enough. Have I understood right? This is not some perfect mathematical solution.
Absolutely, to the best of our knowledge. To further answer that, the Appraisal Foundation has come up with a guidance for valuing contingent considerations. This publication was made in February 2019. It's a publicly available document. This particular document is the Bible of option valuations, if I can say that.
Sorry,
All
which is
complicated.
this publication from whom?
You would see this on the screen. It is Valuation and Financial Reporting Valuation Advisory 4, Valuation of Contingent Consideration, issued in February 19 by the Appraisal Foundation of the US. This is a collation of, it's at least a 300-page document. It talks about valuing put and call options in business combinations, and there are numerous examples given at the end of that guidance, which deals with some of the real life examples, and you will see so the practitioner's method, which I spoke about for arriving at the discount rate for the EBITDA, this is one of the prescribed methods in this guidance, but there are others which are available, which can be adopted, but the most commonly adopted and the simplest to understand is the practitioner's method. There is more guidance in this document which I have named here. This is I would think it has taken at least 5 to 7 years to develop this document. Valuation of contingent considerations. Contingent considerations, or earnouts as we call them, primarily deal with valuation of put and call options underlying the equity of the target. But the guidance which is provided there can also apply in lot of other cases where we are required to value complex options.
Okay, and so this foundation's publications are all in the public domain.
Yes.
Thank you.
It may be a paid document, I'm not sure, but it is definitely available publicly.
Okay. Are these guys reasonable? I mean, don't mind my asking. What does it cost roughly? Are we talking about lakhs or a few thousand?
No, I'm not aware, unfortunately.
Okay.
This brings
Apeksha,
me to
hi.
an end of
In
my
terms of
presentation.
just another question, Apeksha.
Yeah.
While we simulated those various metrics like stock price or equity value or EBITDA or whatever, in most of the cases, the start point is the current actual number. Let's say the current fair value, or in your case, the current equity value based on the deal. Now, in case of EBITDA also, we could have clearly, done based on the current year actual EBITDA and simulated it forward for 5 years. Is there a reason why instead of that we chose, let's say, a PV of a targeted EBITDA and then simulate it back later to 5 years or 3 years?
Because the formula which is described in the stock purchase agreement mentions the target EBITDA for the third year. That's the reason it was selected. Because the eventual payout will still be linked to the third year performance.
Right, but when we have an actual EBITDA today and we have established what is the volatility and what are other metrics by which the EBITDA could change and grow, wouldn't it more be straightforward if we just use the current actual and kind of apply those random numbers and volatilities to arrive at future estimated simulated EBITDAs to which you can apply a multiple?
Meet the brief. It wouldn't meet the brief because the brief is of 3 years.
Yeah.
There is an expectation. So see, the volatility of that EBITDA after 3 years can be very different from what you have now. Because once the acquisition has been made, there can be certain synergies which you will typically may not see on a standalone as is where is performance. That 1500 can actually only be 1000 if one were to ignore synergies.
Okay. Fine.
Which your present EBITDA may not reflect, right?
Understood. Fine.
Any more questions?
I think so. I think so. It was a very good interactive session, Apeksha. Thanks a lot. I'll request Aseem to give a vote of thanks.
Hi, Apeksha. Thanks a lot for this detailed session.
How are you?
Good. I'm fine. So thanks a lot for this detailed session. You know, this topic is not, neither easy to understand nor, easy to explain. So thanks for all the case studies. Yeah, because these actually helped us get a perspective of, how things actually play in the real world. And it's not just an option calculator that we use. So thanks for that. With this, I think we can end the session.